Over coffee at the local diner 3 days later, Sheriff Tom Davis listened to James recount the incident, amusement playing at the corners of his weathered face. "City folks," he chuckled, shaking his head. "Remember when the Hendersons moved in and called in a noise complaint about roosters crowing?" "This is different, Tom," James insisted. "She deliberately used my equipment without permission. That's trespassing at minimum, theft of services at worst." The sheriff nodded. "You want to file a formal complaint?" James hesitated. "Not yet. I'm hoping a padlock and a conversation will solve it." It didn't. The following weekend, James returned from the farmer's market to find Karen and 4 other women in his orchard, filling designer water bottles from his irrigation line. A portable Bluetooth speaker blasted something with heavy bass, and a picnic blanket was spread beneath his prized Honeycrisp apple tree. "What are you doing back on my property?" James demanded, parking his truck at an angle that blocked their cars. Karen looked up, irritation flashing across her face before she composed herself. "James, we're just having a little wellness retreat. The energy here is so grounding." One woman was actually hugging his apple tree, eyes closed in apparent communion with nature. "That's spring water," another woman gushed, raising her bottle. "You can taste the minerals. None of that municipal chemical soup. It's agricultural water," James corrected icily. "For crops. How did you get past the padlock?" Karen's glance toward her oversized purse told him everything he needed to know. "Bolt cutters? Are you serious?" James felt his carefully maintained patience fraying. "The lock must have been defective," Karen replied airily. "Anyway, you never explicitly said we couldn't use the water. If it's such a big deal, maybe you should post signs." James took a deep breath. "I'm asking you all to leave. Now. And Karen, this is your second and final warning." As the women reluctantly packed up their wellness retreat, Karen lingered behind. "You know," she said, voice honey sweet but eyes sharp as flint, "Richard and I paid $1.2 million for our property. We have certain expectations about amenities. Water rights weren't included in your purchase," James replied flatly. Karen's smile turned brittle. "We have very good lawyers, James, very good. And really, who would take a farmer's word over ours? Think about it." The unmistakable sound of pop music blaring from expensive portable speakers drew James away from mending fences the following Tuesday. Rounding the barn, he stopped dead in his tracks, momentarily unable to process what he was seeing. Karen, wearing a bikini top and designer kutak shorts, was standing beside his main water pump. A professional-grade pressure washer, clearly new, price tag still dangling, roared as she directed a powerful spray at her Range Rover. Frothy bubbles cascaded down the vehicle's sides, carrying some kind of shimmering soap that caught the sunlight. 2 other women in equally impractical farm attire were lounging in folding chairs, drinking something pink from mason jars with paper umbrellas. "What in God's name are you doing?" James called out, struggling to keep his voice level. Karen turned, her expression brightening. "James, perfect timing. Do you have any more of those quirky tomatoes? Meredith here is a food stylist for Bon Appetit." James stared at the extension cord running from his pump house to her pressure washer. "You broke into my pump house?" Karen waved dismissively. "The door was barely latched. Listen, your water is amazing. Richard says it's because you have an artesian spring or something. Our well water is disgusting. Smells like pennies. I've been breaking out." One of her friends at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, slowly lowering her mason jar. "That's not the point," James said, approaching the pump controls. "This system irrigates certified organic fields. Those soaps and chemicals you're using will contaminate my soil." Karen's smile faltered and returned with practiced precision. "It's eco-friendly soap, see." She thrust a bottle toward him emblazoned with green lettering and pictures of leaves. 98% natural ingredients. "And the other 2% could cost me my organic certification," James replied, switching off the pump. The pressure washer died mid-spray. The transformation in Karen's demeanor was instant and alarming. Her smile vanished, replaced by a tight-lipped expression of entitlement. "Seriously, it's just water. There's a whole spring, right?" Her voice had risen an octave. "It's my water on my property that I use to grow food that feeds this community," James replied evenly. "And you're trespassing." "God, you country people are so territorial." Karen rolled her eyes dramatically for her friend's benefit. "Fine, I'll leave, but you could really work on your hospitality. In the city, neighbors help each other out." As Karen hastily packed up her impromptu car wash, one of her friends approached James. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "She told us this was her property and you'd said it was fine." The woman glanced back at Karen, who was aggressively wringing out a microfiber cloth. "I'm Diane, by the way. I actually grew up on a farm in Vermont. I should have known better." James nodded appreciatively at the unexpected ally. "It's the chemicals I'm worried about more than the water itself. I spent years getting this soil certified organic. Diane winced. I tried to tell her. She said the bottle had a leaf on it, so it must be fine. She glanced back again. Karen tends to simplify things that don't align with what she wants. Diane? Karen's voice cut through their conversation like a knife. Are you coming or what? We're going to be late for Pilates. Look, Diane said hurriedly, scribbling something on a business card. If she tries this again, call me. I can talk to her. Sometimes she listens to me. Sometimes. She pressed the card into James' calloused palm. James watched them drive away, tires spitting gravel, and noticed the rainbow sheen of chemical runoff already seeping into his soil. He carefully picked up the abandoned soap bottle Karen had left behind, reading the ingredients list with growing concern. Methylisothiazolinone, sodium lauryl sulfate, he muttered. These weren't compounds he wanted anywhere near his heirloom tomatoes. As he walked back to his farmhouse, he spotted Miguel examining the pump house door, which now hung awkwardly on one hinge. She broke the latch, Miguel observed, running his fingers along the splintered wood. You want me to fix it? Put a padlock on it, James replied, the business cat. Over coffee at the local diner 3 days later, Sheriff Tom Davis listened to James recount the incident, amusement playing at the corners of his weathered face. City folks, he chuckled, shaking his head. Remember when the Hendersons moved in and called in a noise complaint about roosters crowing? This is different, Tom, James insisted. She deliberately used my equipment without permission. That's trespassing at minimum, theft of services at worst. The sheriff nodded. You want to file a formal complaint? James hesitated. Not yet. I'm hoping a padlock and a conversation will solve it. It didn't. The following weekend, James returned from the farmer's market to find Karen and 4 other women in his orchard, filling designer water bottles from his irrigation line. A portable Bluetooth speaker blasted something with heavy bass, and a picnic blanket was spread beneath his prized Honeycrisp apple tree. What are you doing back on my property? James demanded, parking his truck at an angle that blocked their cars. Karen looked up, irritation flashing across her face before she composed herself. James, we're just having a little wellness retreat. The energy here is so grounding. One woman was actually hugging his apple tree, eyes closed in apparent communion with nature. That's spring water, another woman gushed, raising her bottle. You can taste the minerals. None of that municipal chemical soup. It's agricultural water, James corrected icily. For crops. How did you get past the padlock? Karen's glance toward her oversized purse told him everything he needed to know. Bolt cutters? Are you serious? James felt his carefully maintained patience fraying. The lock must have been defective, Karen replied airily. Anyway, you never explicitly said we couldn't use the water. If it's such a big deal, maybe you should post signs. James took a deep breath. I'm asking you all to leave. Now. And Karen, this is your second and final warning. As the women reluctantly packed up their wellness retreat, Karen lingered behind. You know, she said, voice honey sweet but eyes sharp as flint, Richard and I paid $1.2 million for our property. We have certain expectations about amenities. Water rights weren't included in your purchase, James replied flatly. Karen's smile turned brittle. We have very good lawyers, James, very good. And really, who would take a farmer's word over ours? Think about it. August arrived with a merciless heat wave that baked the earth and sent the county into Stage 3 water restrictions. Residential use was limited to essential needs only. Agricultural allowances were reduced by 40%. For 2 weeks straight, James had been waking at 3 a.m. to hand water his most vulnerable crops, salvaging what he could of the season's harvest. When his phone pinged at 11:23 p.m. with a motion alert from his security camera, James was still awake, poring over spreadsheets and trying to figure out how to keep the farm solvent if half his tomato crop failed. The night vision footage showed Richard's pickup truck backing up to the pump house. Karen directed with a flashlight as Richard connected a large industrial hose to James' main water line. They worked methodically, filling container after container loaded in the truck bed. Son of a bitch, James muttered, grabbing his keys. He drove without headlights down the back farm road, cutting the engine and coasting the final 100 yards. As he approached on foot, he could hear Karen and Richard arguing in harsh whispers. Hurry up, Karen hissed. We need at least 12 more barrels if we're going to fill a pool. This is criminal trespassing, Richard replied tensely. If he presses charges, he won't, Karen cut him off. He's a sad old farmer who can barely keep his precious vegetables alive. What's he going to do, call his tractors to attack us? James stepped into the flashlight beam. Actually, I was thinking more along the lines of the sheriff. Karen shrieked, dropping her flashlight. Richard froze, a guilty teenager caught mid-prank. James, God, you scared me. Karen quickly recovered, smoothing her designer athleisure wear. We were just. stealing approximately 800 gallons of water during a drought emergency. James finished for her. I've already texted the footage to Sheriff Davis. Richard's shoulders slumped. Karen, I told you this was a bad idea. It's just water. Karen's voice rose to a near hysterical pitch. Our pool contractor said we need to fill it now or the liner could warp in this heat. What were we supposed to do? Pay for a water delivery service like everyone else, James replied evenly, or wait until the restrictions lift. Do you have any idea what those services charge during a drought? Karen demanded. Actually, I do, James said quietly, because every drop I use to keep my crops alive costs me. That water you're stealing isn't just water. It's my livelihood. In the moonlight, James could see rows of his tomato plants wilting despite his careful morning watering. Tomorrow, he'd have to decide which sections of his crops to sacrifice. Meanwhile, the Donovans were stealing his water for a swimming pool. I had to let the south field die yesterday, James continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. That's about $8,000 in lost income for my farm. I've got 3 restaurant contracts I won't be able to fulfill now. Richard at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. He shifted his weight and avoided James' gaze. James couldn't sleep. The confrontation replayed in his mind as he watched his irrigation system deliver precisely measured droplets to rows of struggling pepper plants. 3 more weeks of drought could devastate his harvest, yet Karen was stealing his water for a swimming pool. Send us a bill, she'd said. The more he thought about it, the more he warmed to the idea. At sunrise, he called his cousin Sarah, who had worked at the county water authority for 15 years. You want to what? She asked, incredulous after hearing his plan. Make a point, James replied. She clearly thinks water is worthless. I want to show her exactly what she's been taking. Sarah sighed. You know I can't generate an actual bill. That would be fraud. Not an actual bill, James clarified. An educational document that looks like a bill, complete with agricultural water rates during drought conditions, commercial hauling fees, and equipment access charges. There was a pause. How much water are we talking about? James consulted his notes. Based on security footage, timestamps, and container sizes, approximately 25,000 gallons over the past 2 months. Sarah whistled. Bearing a stage 3 restriction? At emergency commercial rates? Her keyboard clicked rapidly. That would be just shy of $5,000. Perfect, James said. 3 hours later, Sarah arrived with an official-looking document bearing the County Water Authority's logo as a watermark. It itemized each documented instance of water theft, including date, time, and estimated volume. It detailed the current commercial water rates during drought emergency, access fees, after-hours emergency service charges, and equipment usage fees. The total, $4,876.42. This is genius, James said, examining the document. But we need a disclaimer. At the bottom, in smaller print but still clearly legible, Sarah added, this is not an actual bill, but rather an educational estimate of the commercial value of the water resources you have been taking without permission. James added security camera screenshots, timestamps, and a detailed explanation of agricultural water exemptions that didn't extend to residential recreational use. You know she's going to be furious, Sarah warned. James nodded, slipping everything into an official-looking envelope. That's the point. The Donovans' mailbox stood at the end of their recently paved driveway, a massive stone structure with Donovan Estates engraved in pseudo-medieval lettering. James slipped the envelope inside, raised the little red flag, and drove to town for his weekly farm-to-restaurant deliveries. He was unloading crates of heirloom tomatoes behind Millfield's most popular farm-to-table restaurant when his phone erupted with notification sounds. 8 missed calls and 16 text messages, all from an unknown number. The final text read, I'm going to sue you into oblivion. James smiled, thanked the chef who was eyeing his phone curiously, and headed home. He was barely through his front door when the sound of squealing tires announced Karen's arrival. She stormed up his porch steps in designer rain boots despite the cloudless sky, designer sunglasses pushed up into her highlighted hair, face flushed with fury. The educational document was clutched in her manicured hand, slightly crumpled from her grip. You, she shrieked, brandishing the paper. $5,000? For water? Are you insane? James leaned against his porch railing, arms crossed. Hello, Karen. I've already called my attorney, she continued, voice trembling with rage. This is harassment, fraud, and extortion. I'm going to own this pathetic little dirt farm when I'm done with you. Did you read the disclaimer at the bottom? James asked calmly. Karen faltered momentarily, then thrust the paper closer to him. What disclaimer? The part that explains this isn't an actual bill, just an educational document showing what your water usage would cost at current commercial rates. Karen squinted at the fine print, her fury momentarily displaced by confusion. So, You're not actually charging me this. I have no authority to bill you, James explained patiently. I'm merely following your suggestion to send you a bill so you can understand the value of what you've been taking. This is ridiculous, Karen sputtered, but with noticeably less conviction. Nobody pays this much for water. Actually, many people do, James countered, especially during drought conditions when resources are scarce. Commercial water haulers charge premium rates during water restrictions. Pool companies build those costs into their contracts. Karen's righteous indignation visibly deflated as James calmly explained water rights law, the definitions of criminal trespassing and theft of services, and the documented evidence he had collected over the past months. I'd have also provided copies of this documentation to Sheriff Davis and the County Water Authority, James added. Not as a formal complaint yet, but as a record in case further incidents occur. Karen stared at him, momentarily speechless, perhaps for the first time in her adult life. You're bluffing, she finally managed. James pulled out his